Décollage.
Beautiful valley.
Really amazing.
The International Space Station has been occupied since the year 2000. Its primary role is science, but just keeping it functioning is an immense task.
This is Freedom 7. The fuel is go, 1.2 G, cabin at 14 psi.
In May 1961, Alan Shepard had flown a brief suborbital hop in his Freedom 7 space capsule. The Redstone booster that had launched Shepard was not capable of lifting a heavy spacecraft to orbit. The flight caused celebration in America, but by comparison, the first man in space, Russia's Yuri Gagarin, had completed a full Earth orbit and had become an international celebrity. The newly formed American Space Agency, NASA, had been charged with closing the space technology gap with its communist adversary, the Soviet Union, and Project Mercury was the means for achieving this. Until the more powerful Atlas booster was ready, the only rocket Project Mercury had was the Redstone, and NASA was keen to refine the Mercury capsule, so a second suborbital flight was scheduled. This time, the astronaut would be Gus Grissom.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all.
Less than 3 weeks after Shepard's flight, America's president made a decisive contribution.
On the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
At NASA, the training program and the preparation for the second Mercury flight with astronaut Gus Grissom continued as scheduled. But administrators realised that their president's announcement would mean a rapid expansion of the space agency. New staff were hired and long-term contracts were negotiated. Of immediate importance were modifications to the Mercury capsule. At the astronauts' request, a window was added and a new hatch using explosive bolts had been designed for quicker egress. 70 bolts held the hatch in place, but these now had an intentional weak point and a small explosive charge would blow off the hatch if required. Gus Grissom would be the first to fly with the new hatch. It could be triggered from both inside and outside the capsule. On the morning of July the 21st, 1961, another Redstone rocket was being fueled. Since Yuri Gagarin's orbital flight in April, nothing had been heard from the Russians, and the Mercury team could feel they might be catching up to their communist adversaries. Weather had already caused this flight to be postponed 3 times. Grissom had named his Mercury capsule Liberty Bell 7. Confusingly, all Mercury spacecraft had the number 7 because there were 7 astronauts. This mission was similar to Alan Shepard's flight, lasting around 15 minutes, with most important events happening automatically. However, the thruster control system had been modified, but Grissom would have less than 3 minutes to test it. The launch tower rolled back after a half-hour delay. One of the hatch bolts was misaligned, and it took engineers some time to conclude that the remaining 69 bolts would be enough.
2, 1, 0. Liftoff.
Roger, this is Liberty Bell 7. The clock is operating.
Loud and clear, Jose.
Testing the manual thruster control, Grissom found it more sluggish than the ground-based simulator. On changing to the new rate command control system, he found it worked well, but was heavy on fuel.
I've got to try this left yaw. About all I can really see is clouds.
All too quickly, he was preparing for re-entry on what had seemed a perfect flight. Aircraft in the landing area picked up a radio beacon that started when the capsule's parachutes deployed. Helicopters soon found Liberty Bell 7 floating right on target. Everything appeared normal. Inside the capsule, Grissom had released the safety catch on the hatch. Not long after, the explosive charge blew the hatch open and the craft began filling with water. Grissom had to jump clear, and the helicopter was struggling to lift the water-filled capsule clear of the waves. Warning lights in the chopper indicated the engine had been overtaxed and that failure was imminent. The pilot dumped the capsule, which sank beneath 5,000 metres of the Atlantic. Grissom had been struggling to stay afloat too, and he was winched to safety in a water-filled spacesuit. The loss of the capsule and its valuable data was not good, and immediately engineers began asking how the hatch could blow on its own. Grissom was adamant that the hatch had blown by itself. While he was still soaking wet and with doctors trying to examine him, he took a congratulatory call from President Kennedy. Gus Grissom's suborbital flight would be the last Mercury mission to use the underpowered Redstone booster. Project Mercury planners wanted their next astronaut to go into orbit, but there was a problem. The more powerful Atlas booster they were relying on only had a 30% success rate. Designed in 1955, the Atlas was developed as a nuclear weapons delivery system, but by 1961 the technology had not matured. It was not dependable. At this point, NASA had launched 3 unmanned Mercury Atlas combinations, and 2 had failed catastrophically. NASA was beginning to argue with Convair, the rocket's builders, about reliability. Modifications, including a thicker skin and a transistorized telemetry system, were introduced. But then, the Soviet Union launched Vostok 2.
Newspaper headlines tell the story. Herman Titov of Russia returns to Earth after orbiting the globe 17 times in a little more than 25 hours, covering 435,000 miles, which is more than twice the distance from the Earth to the Moon. An orbit by a U.S. astronaut is planned later this year.
His name was Enos, and just as chimpanzee Ham had tested the first Mercury Redstone, Enos would test the Mercury Atlas. NASA gave all its really dangerous missions to chimpanzees. In November 1961, Enos blasted off. He orbited twice in 3 hours and 20 minutes and, although it wasn't a flawless mission, it gave the planners confidence that most of the glitches had been eliminated from the Mercury-Atlas combination. The next Mercury mission would carry John Glenn. He would be America's first man to orbit the planet. The flight had been scheduled for January the 16th, 1962. But technical issues and then problems with the weather meant that the launch had been delayed till February the 20th. For the US, this was an important mission. It would show that they were catching up with the Russians, who had clearly demonstrated their capability for long-term orbital flights. People had turned out along the beaches of central Florida to watch the launch, and national pride was on the line. The Cold War had reinforced Stars and Stripes patriotism, and John Glenn, in the spacecraft he had named Friendship 7, was striking a blow for truth, justice, and the American way.
Godspeed, John Glenn. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
Everything about the launch was close to flawless.
Okay. A little bumpy along about here.
5.5 minutes after blastoff, Friendship 7 was in orbit, and Mission Control affirmed that the trajectory was good for at least 7 orbits. There was a minor problem with thrusters, but when a faulty sensor indicated that the spacecraft's heat shield had come loose, it was decided to bring the mission to a close after just 3 orbits.
Capsule turning around, and I could see the booster during turnaround just a couple...
3 days after his return, at a ceremony at the Manned Spacecraft Center, the President decorated John Glenn with NASA's Distinguished Service Award, and across the US, support for the manned space program was enthusiastic. There were 3 more manned orbital flights in the Mercury program, each one increasing in duration, refining techniques and technology. Ultimately, the last scheduled Mercury missions were cancelled in favour of the next program. NASA was in a race to the moon, and Project Gemini was a big step in that direction. Since the beginning of rocket launches, engineers have used an array of cameras to monitor their craft's behaviour, and as rocket technology has developed, so have the cameras. A typical shuttle launch was monitored by 135 different cameras. Fixed cameras, shooting at 400 frames per second, capture both the solid fuel boosters and the rocket engines so that any anomalies can be scrutinised in detail after the launch. Other units surround the pad area to record the launch from every conceivable angle. In the period leading up to liftoff, when access to the launch complex is limited, the cameras play a vital role in continuous pre-flight inspections. Another group, called the Final Inspection Team, is equipped with handheld cameras. They have close access to the pad and launch gantry. Anything out of the ordinary is recorded for further scrutiny by a team of specialists at the launch centre. In addition, the launch management team can request images of any subsystem that might be returning suspect readings. The team can identify and photograph problems that may otherwise go unnoticed. When a spacecraft leaves the ground, a different set of tracking cameras continue to record. There are 17 medium-range trackers near the perimeter of the launch zone and at least 21 long-range trackers. These telescopic units run both high-definition video and 35mm film. They're essentially radar-controlled with fine adjustment via a joystick so sensitive it can pick up the operator's heartbeat. On the 16th of January 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia blasted off into a clear blue sky. 83 seconds after liftoff, a chunk of insulating foam broke off from the external tank, hitting the shuttle's left wing. It was picked up by 2 of the tracking cameras. Though the foam is very light, the incident happened when Columbia was travelling at about 800 kilometres per hour. The crew of 7 was lost, when Columbia broke up during re-entry 2 weeks later. An investigation revealed that foam strikes had been seen before. The normalization of deviance was responsible for not having fixed the problem earlier. Shuttle flights were grounded, and images from the tracking cameras led to a redesign of the external tank's insulation. Future shuttle flights, with one exception, were restricted to the International Space Station. Upon arrival, each shuttle was required to perform a gradual flip, allowing cameras on the ISS to capture images of the craft's thermal tiles. Any damage revealed would mean astronauts could wait at the station for a return to Earth on a later flight. But such precautions only revealed the vulnerabilities of the aging shuttle, and the fleet was retired in 2011, leaving the United States without a human-rated spacecraft. In a field that relies upon cutting-edge technology, the 30-year-old shuttles could no longer be updated. But a new system is on the way, the Orion, with every stage of testing and development being meticulously recorded. The International Space Station serves as a research and observation platform in the weightless environment of low Earth orbit. It has been continuously occupied since Expedition Crew 1 took up residence in the year 2000. The ISS has a mass of 450,000 kilograms, easily making it the largest man-made object in orbit. The space station had its origins in the Russian Mir 2. It was intended as a replacement for the aging Mir space station that had been in orbit since 1986. Launched by the Soviet Union, the original Mir had deteriorated badly toward the end of its 15-year life. The International Space Station's first component was the Zarya module, originally intended as the first piece of Mir 2. The US had a proposal for Space Station Freedom, and the European Space Agency were planning the Columbus Space Station, but the prohibitive cost of such ventures led to a consolidation of the different schemes. The Space Shuttle became vital in the orbiting construction project. The second component was American. Known as the Unity module, it was added in 1998. Over 13 years, the space station took shape. Russian Proton and Soyuz rockets, as well as the shuttle, all delivering components. The last shuttle flight ever, in 2011, was to deliver a European multi-purpose logistic module. At that point, it consisted of 15 pressurized segments and a truss assembly that anchors the solar arrays and the cooling radiators. Even so, the ISS remains unfinished, with both a European robotic arm and a Russian multi-purpose laboratory still to be delivered. The Russian modules could all dock automatically, but a considerable amount of construction work was carried out by astronauts based in the station. Even after the building work finished, regular maintenance and running repairs require mission specialists to go outside. One of the last features to be added was the cupola, which includes the space station's largest window. Views are astounding. As the ISS travels over polar regions, the northern and southern auroras show as iridescent bands in the upper atmosphere. This is an indication of high solar activity, with the solar wind showering the Earth in charged particles. Generally, as the ISS is in a low Earth orbit, solar activity does not present a health hazard to the space station crew, as they are shielded by the Earth's magnetic field, which deflects all but the most intense ejections from the Sun. However, when solar flares are detected, the crew must shelter in the Russian orbital segment, which has shielding to protect against increased radiation. Even so, ISS crew members in one day receive as much radiation as a person on Earth will get in a year. Periodically, partner nations will launch a resupply ship to the ISS. Since 2009, Japan's aerospace agency JAXA has sent 4 White Stork cargo craft. ESA has sent 5 automated transfer vehicles, which dock automatically and remain at the station for around 6 months. Since the retirement of the Space Shuttle, the United States has used commercial contractors for resupply. Like the Japanese ship, SpaceX's Dragon cargo craft will come alongside and wait to be captured by the station's robotic arm. The most frequent visitor is the Russian workhorse, the Soyuz, used for ferrying crew members and its cargo equivalent, the Progress. These also dock automatically. 2 Soyuz craft stay at the ISS for emergency evacuation. With the arrival of a new cargo craft, the ISS crew are kept busy unloading and stowing new provisions. Ultimately, the cargo capsule is filled with waste and jettisoned. Long-term exposure to microgravity leads to loss of muscle mass and bone density, and daily exercise is important in reducing the health implications of weightlessness. Outside routine duties in keeping the space station functioning, the astronauts' regular work is science. This can be anything from monitoring plant and simple animal specimens being raised in microgravity to the search for dark matter via the alpha magnetic spectrometer. At the end of their 6-month stay on the ISS, 3 of the cosmonauts cram into the waiting Soyuz capsule and prepare for the journey back to Earth. 3.5 hours after the craft undocks, the cosmonauts will be on the ground in Kazakhstan. Major partners America and Russia cannot agree on funding for continued operations beyond 2020, which could mean the end of the orbiting laboratory.